There is a place in the state of Georgia where no criminal ever wants to go. That place is called Alto State Prison, formerly Lee Arundel in Alto, Georgia. If you come here, you surely won't make it out.
Stay tuned for Tales from the Toe.
Chapter 6, Kick Doe returns. It had been a few weeks now since Tank started his sentence in Alto, and the routine of prison life was starting to settle in. Each day, the same monotony gripped the yard, the chow hall, and his cell. But beneath that routine, tension simmered. Tank had fought off challengers and earned respect, but prison was unpredictable. No matter how many times you fought, there was always someone waiting in the shadows, ready to take a shot. That someone appeared on a Tuesday afternoon when new transfers came to the prison. Tank was in the yard working out, minding his business, shadowboxing near the pull-up bars when the murmurs started. Inmates talked in low voices, their eyes darting toward the gate as a new transfer came through. Tank didn't pay much attention. New faces came and went all the time. But this one, it seemed, was different. The man was dark-skinned and short, real short. Maybe 5'1.5" or 5'2" if that, built like a bull, with a hard, square jaw and eyes that never stopped moving. His name was Kick Doe, and he was a Crip from Statesboro, Georgia. In Alto State Prison, there were legends, and then there was Kick Doe. His small frame belied a dangerous man, skilled in an infamous prison fighting style known as the Alto Shuffle. This brutal technique, born out of the Georgia prison system in the 1980s, was a combination of lightning fast blocks and sophisticated, unpredictable punches. The style allowed a fighter to land multiple strikes on their opponent before they even had a chance to throw one punch. Kick Doe, known for his prowess with the Alto Shuffle, had never lost a fight. He had a reputation as a scrappy, relentless brawler who could dismantle even the toughest of men. His reign of dominance inside the toe earned him both fear and respect. He'd been transferred back to the infamous prison after spending 2 years on the tier program at another facility. His return sent ripples through the prison. Kick Doe had a reputation, one that stretched far beyond his height. 2 years ago, at Alto, he had killed an infamous predator in the prison named King Leonidas, a 6'5" gangster disciple leader, earning both fear and respect from inmates and guards alike. Leonidas had been the booty bully who had turned out another boxing champ, Ryan Garcia, and preyed on the weak, ruling the lower ranges of the prison with intimidation. You can check that story out on the same channel. Ryan Garcia goes 5 rounds with a booty bully. King Leonidas was a menace. That is, until Kick Doe ended his reign with a swift and brutal fight, dispatching the giant with a deadly series of punches and blocks in the fighting style known as the Alto Shuffle.
This is Big Miz from the zoo, and I got a story about when I first got introduced to a style of fighting in the Georgia Department of Corrections. It's an old chain gang style of fighting. It's called the Alto Shuffle, right? Now, it was said that if people know how to do it or they master it, they're gonna beat you halfway to death inside that cell.
The Alto Shuffle was a legend of its own. It wasn't just street fighting or boxing. It was a mix of martial arts inspired movements, quick punches, fluid blocks, sharp strikes. Kick Doe had honed it over years of doing time on the life sentence he'd gotten. As the whispers reached Tank, he noticed the way the yard shifted. Inmates who normally clustered near him backed off, their attention drawn to the newcomer. Kick Doe was infamous not just for his fighting skills, but for his habit of stealing from other inmates. He was slick, and often people didn't realize they'd been robbed until it was too late. Tank, unaware of Kick Doe's past, barely gave him a second glance. He was focused on his training, trying to stay sharp. But the next day, that all changed. In the chow hall, Tank sat with his usual tray of food, his mind distant, thinking of the fights outside the prison that he used to dominate. As he finished his meal, some nasty-ass slab of meat the inmates called mystery meatloaf, he stood to leave, but then paused. His free world sunglasses, the ones he kept in his pocket, were missing. At first, Tank thought he might have misplaced them, but his instincts kicked in. He'd had them with him minutes ago. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on Kick Doe, who sat at a table across the hall, casually eating his meal. Something about the way the man looked, too calm, too at ease, made Tank's jaw tighten. The next morning, when Tank went to the yard, the missing shade still nagged at him. Kick Doe was there, going through what looked like a series of super fast, deliberate movements. Punches, blocks, quick steps. It was a strange rhythm, but Tank could see the control in it. What he was looking at was called the Alto Shuffle, and it was nothing like what he was used to. Tank had never been one to ignore a problem. And as far as he was concerned, the missing sunglasses were a problem. After his workout, he approached Kick Doe, who was finishing up his routine. "You seen something of mine? A pair of Gucci shades?" Tank asked, his voice steady but carrying the weight of his reputation. He didn't need to explain what he meant. Kick Doe didn't stop moving, throwing a few more quick punches into the air before turning to Tank, his eyes sharp with amusement. "Seen lots of things in here, my nigga," Kick Doe said, his tone light but his words laced with a challenge. Tank stepped closer, his muscles tense, ready. "My glasses," he said bluntly. "Nigga, I know you got my shit." Kick Doe finally stopped, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. His expression shifted, and for the first time, Tank saw it. The edge. The same look every fighter had before a fight. But there was something more in Kick Doe's eyes. Calculation. "I know who you is," Kick Doe said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "But if I wanted you shit, I would have took it, not stole it, champ," Kick Doe said, a sly grin spreading across his face. "Just a reminder, champ. Next time you accuse me of some shit I ain't do, me and the gang gonna make sure you don't get back in that ring, boy." Tank's blood boiled, but he kept himself in check. He knew a fight was coming, but it wouldn't be today. As he picked up his pass and walked away, he could feel the eyes of the yard on him. Kick Doe wasn't just another challenger. He was something more dangerous, a man who could fight, but who also played a long game, one Tank hadn't yet figured out. One thing was clear, this was a new kind of battle, and Tank had just crossed paths with an opponent who fought on his own terms. Chapter 7, A Surprise Visit. The drab walls of Alto State Prison felt a little less suffocating a few mornings later when Tank heard the news. He had a visitor. He hadn't expected anyone, and his heart jumped when they told him who it was. Floyd Money Mayweather, his former mentor, the man who had taken him from the streets to the highest heights of boxing, had come to see him. As Tank was led into the visitation room, his eyes locked onto the familiar figure. Floyd, dressed head to toe in designer clothes, sunglasses hiding his eyes, and a swagger in his step that had never left him. Despite the grim environment, Mayweather seemed completely out of place, like a king visiting a forgotten part of his kingdom. "Yo, champ," Floyd grinned, giving Tank a quick embrace. "How you holding up in here?" Tank tried to smile, but the weight of prison life had dulled his usual fire. "I'm surviving," he replied, but Floyd wasn't paying attention to the sadness in his voice. Instead, his eyes scanned the room. Already making judgments, already plotting his escape back to the lavish world, of riches and fame. Tank's eyes caught something across the room. Kick Doe. The short, stocky inmate sat a few tables away, leaning in close to a woman Tank assumed was his girlfriend. She was overweight but cute, with long braids and a tough exterior that matched Kick Doe's persona. They spoke in low voices, her hand resting on his arm, but it was clear by the smirk on Kick Doe's face that he knew Tank was watching. "That's him," Tank muttered to Floyd, nodding toward Kick Doe. "That's the guy I told you about. Best fighter on the compound. Says he can beat anybody in here." Floyd scoffed, laughing like it was the most ridiculous thing he'd ever heard. "Best fighter? Ain't nobody in here touching you, let alone some damn midget motherfucker." Tank's face tightened. "Nah, I'm serious, man. He's got skills. Some shit called the Alto Shuffle he uses. It's different. Quick, like a mix of street fighting and martial arts. And he's been a problem. Stole my Gucci glasses last week, threatened me." Floyd's amusement vanished. His nostrils flared as he glanced back over at Kick Doe. "He took your glasses? Threatened you?" His voice was low, laced with anger. "Who does that elf-looking bitch think he is?" Before Tank could say anything, Floyd was already on his feet, storming toward Kick Doe's table. Tank's heart sank. He knew Floyd was used to being the top dog wherever he went, but Alto wasn't the Las Vegas Strip. Here, there were no crowds to cheer him on. Kick Doe looked up as Floyd approached, his face calm, but his eyes narrowing with a calculating gleam. His girlfriend pulled back, sensing the sudden tension. Floyd didn't waste any time. "You the one fucking with Tank?" he snapped, taking off his sunglasses. "Think you some kind of fighter? I'm Money Mayweather, nigga. Undefeated. You don't steal from my people." Kick Doe stood slowly, his expression never changing. He glanced over at Tank, then back at Floyd, and smiled. "I know who you are, champ," he said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. "But you don't know who the fuck I is?" Floyd swung first, fast, precise, just like in the ring. But Kick Doe was ready. He dipped to the side, avoiding the punch with a fluid motion that seemed almost too smooth for a man his size. Floyd went in again, quicker this time, throwing a combination of jabs and hooks. But Kick Doe blocked and dodged each one, his body moving in a way that looked almost like a dance, the Alto Shuffle. Tank watched, frozen. Floyd wasn't used to missing, and his frustration was growing. He stepped forward, looking to land a big blow, but Kick Doe sidestepped with blinding speed, his hand shooting out in a lightning-fast counterpunch that caught Floyd square in the jaw. The room went silent. Floyd stumbled more out of shock than pain and tried to regain his footing, but Kick Doe didn't let up. He unleashed a flurry of strikes, quick, precise, and impossibly fast. The Alto Shuffle wasn't just a style, it was like watching a blur of fists and feet moving in perfect harmony. Before Tank or anyone else could react, Kick Doe landed a crushing blow to Floyd's temple. Floyd Mayweather, the undefeated champ, crumpled to the ground. The room erupted in chaos. Guards scrambled, shouts filled the air, and the CERT team rushed in. But the damage was done. Kick Doe stood over Floyd's unconscious body, breathing heavy but calm, as if he'd just finished a light workout. His girlfriend sat frozen in shock, her hand covering her mouth. Tank's mind raced. The sight of Floyd, his mentor, his friend, lying knocked out cold on the dirty prison floor was something he'd never imagined seeing. And the fact that it was Kick Doe who had done it made it worse. It wasn't just a loss for Floyd. It was a signal to everyone in Alto that Kick Doe wasn't just another inmate. He was the Sigma now. He defeated an undefeated champion boxer. The guards grabbed Floyd, still dazed, and dragged him out of the visitation room. But before they could reach the door, the warden appeared, his face a mask of fury. "That's it," he shouted. "Mr. Mayweather, you're banned from my prison. You won't be visiting inmate Davis again." Tank didn't even have time to process what had happened before they were gone. Floyd, his last connection to the outside world, was taken away, and all because of Kickdo. As the news spread throughout the prison, Tank could hear the whispers in the yard, the chow hall, the cells. Everyone was talking about how Kickdo, the 5'2" inmate from Statesboro, had knocked out the undefeated Floyd Mayweather. Inmates who had once admired Tank now looked at him with a mix of awe and fear, knowing that if Kickdo could beat Mayweather, there was no one left who could stand against him. And Tank, for the first time in his life, realized that this wasn't a fight he could win. Not here, not in Alto. Kickdo had made sure of that. Chapter 8. The Theft. The daily routine at Alto State Prison had a rhythm to it. Wake up, chow, go to detail, yard time, repeat. But prison life was never simple. Beneath the surface of the monotonous schedule, there were games being played, and Tank Davis knew it. Still, he kept his head down, trying to avoid unnecessary trouble, even though trouble seemed to find him lately, especially in the form of Kickdo. It had been weeks since the short-sized gang member knocked out Floyd Mayweather during that fateful visit. The entire prison buzzed about it for weeks, and while Tank still had some respect, he felt the weight of Kickdo's shadow over him. The tension between them simmered beneath every interaction, though neither had directly confronted the other since. Then came the theft. One morning, as the dorm headed to breakfast around 4:45 a.m., Tank was one of the last to leave. He paused for a second at his locker box, glancing over his few belongings: a gold watch, a pair of Kevin Durant sneakers, and $80 worth of soups, honey buns, cookies, and summer sausages. Prison currency. It was how you survived in here. He shut the locker with a click and followed the others toward the cafeteria. The morning was like any other. The chow hall filled with the usual noise of heavy plastic trays clanging, inmates talking in hushed voices, and the occasional shout from a CO. But Tank couldn't shake the strange feeling he had when he left his cell. Something wasn't right. When he returned from chow hall and opened his locker box, that uneasy feeling turned into cold, hard anger. His property was gone. Even the legal mail he'd kept in 2 large brown envelopes. The chips, the ramen noodles, the honey buns, the cosmetics he had, all swiped. Someone had picked the lock cleanly, taking everything worth a dime. $80 worth of items, gone in a flash. Tank's blood boiled. In prison, stealing was a direct challenge. It wasn't just about the items. It was about respect, about power. And Tank wasn't about to let it slide. He slammed the locker shut, his mind racing. He knew how things worked in here. Word traveled fast. That night, he made an offer in the dorm, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, but just quiet enough to avoid the guards' attention. "Listen up, dorm, I got $100 cash app for anyone who can tell me who took my shit," Tank yelled sternly, leaning against the day room door, arms crossed. The men around him shot glances at each other. Information like this didn't come for free, but $100 was a good deal in prison. And no one could deny that Tank had plenty of money to make his offer tempting. The whisper started immediately. In a place like Alto, it didn't take long for word to spread. Everyone wanted something: an extra pack of noodles, a honey bun, something to make their time inside a little easier. Tank knew someone would come forward. The next day, just as Tank had expected, an inmate approached him in the yard. A scrawny, light-skinned blood named Hennessy, who always had his ears to the ground. He wasn't tough, but he was slippery, the type who knew everyone's business. "Yo, Tank," Hennessy whispered, sidling up to him near the fence. "Heard you looking for some info, my nigga." Tank didn't even glance at him, keeping his eyes straight ahead. "Talk," The Athens, Georgia native leaned in closer. "It's Kikdo. Saw him sneaking into your cell during chow yesterday. Watched him come out with a bag full of your stuff." Tank's jaw clenched. He'd had a feeling. Kikdo had a history of taking from anyone he felt like. It was part of what kept him on top. But this was personal. "Thanks," Tank muttered, pulling out his illegal cell phone and sending the snitching blood the $100 after getting his Cash App name. He knew Hennessy wouldn't lie about something like this. If Kikdo was behind the theft, then things would have just escalated. As Hennessy slinked away, Tank's mind raced with options. He could confront Kikdo, but after what had happened with Floyd, Tank wasn't sure if that was the best move. He wasn't afraid, but Kikdo had a reputation for making problems disappear, and Tank wasn't in the mood to end up with more enemies. Still, the theft was a line crossed. Tank couldn't just let it go. Word would get around if he did, and his already fragile reputation would crumble even further. He had to do something. And soon. Chapter 9, the main event. Tensions in the dorm had been simmering for weeks, ever since Kikdo swiped $80 worth of Tank's commissary and left him humiliated. Tank couldn't walk through the yard without hearing whispers. The inmates respected him as a boxer, sure, but Kikdo was something else, a wild card, a master of the Alto Shuffle, and the man who'd knocked out Floyd Mayweather. The theft had been the last straw. Tank couldn't afford to let this slide, not if he wanted to survive in the unforgiving world of prison. His pride was on the line, and behind the razor wire, pride was everything. The fight was inevitable. It happened one evening after chow, when the dorm was quieter than usual and the guards were just out of sight. Word had spread through the compound that Tank and Kikdo were about to settle things. Inmates gathered in small clusters, buzzing with excitement. Fights weren't unusual here, but this was different. This was Tank Davis, the world-renowned boxer, going up against Kikdo, the most feared man in the prison. They squared off in a dim corner of the yard, away from the watchtowers. Tank's muscles were tense, his fists clenched. Across from him stood Kikdo, his face a mask of calm confidence. His short, stocky frame seemed relaxed, but, his eyes gleamed with intensity. He knew he had the upper hand. He had beaten better men than Tank before, even without the help of his Crip brothers. And his Alto Shuffle was the key weapon. The crowd gathered closer, and the fight began. Tank came out swinging, his fists fast and powerful, the way they had been in the ring countless times. But Kikdo was slippery. He dodged Tank's punches effortlessly, moving in that strange, almost dance-like rhythm. Quick steps, fluid blocks, weaving in and out of Tank's range. The Alto Shuffle wasn't just a fighting style. It was like watching a man move through a storm, untouched by the chaos around him. Kikdo countered with quick jabs, sharp punches that Tank struggled to block. The crowd roared every time Kikdo landed a hit, and within minutes, Tank was on the defensive. His lips were busted. Blood dripped down his chin, and his eyes were beginning to swell from the constant barrage. "Come on, Tank!" someone shouted from the crowd, but it did little to boost his morale. For 7 brutal minutes, Kikdo dominated. His fists danced around Tank's defenses, delivering punishing blows with surgical precision. Tank, used to fighting in a structured ring, couldn't find his rhythm against the unpredictable Alto Shuffle. Every time he thought he had Kikdo figured out, the smaller man switched up his movements, slipping past Tank's guard and landing another hit. By the end of those 7 minutes, Tank was a mess. His face was swollen, his vision blurry, and his body felt like it had been through a car wreck. He had 2 black eyes cuts all over his face and bruises blooming under his yellow skin. His legs were shaky, and the voices of the cheering inmates started to blur into a distant hum. But Tank wasn't done. Somewhere deep inside, the fire of a fighter still burned. This wasn't just a brawl, it was survival. And Tank had one thing going for him: his heart. He wasn't the type to give up, no matter how bad things got. Kick Doe, seeing Tank's weakened state, decided to end it. He moved in for the final blow, his fists moving in the familiar pattern of the Alto Shuffle, a flurry of strikes meant to knock Tank out cold. But that's when it happened. Tank, in a desperate last-second move, threw a wild punch. It wasn't planned and it wasn't perfect, but it landed. His fist connected with the side of Kick Doe's head, hitting him square in the temple. For a moment, everything stopped. Kick Doe stumbled, his expression going blank. The crowd, once rowdy and cheering, went silent as Kick Doe swayed on his feet. Then, like a puppet whose strings had been cut, he collapsed to the ground, his face and body hitting the dirt with a sickening thud, cracking his big nose in the process. Tank staggered back, barely able to stand himself, but his eyes never left Kick Doe's unmoving form. Something was wrong. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach, just like the night he was tricked into having forbidden sex with the transmission in Atlanta. The crowd was no longer cheering. Instead, a murmur of confusion and fear spread through the inmates. Guards rushed in, pushing through the crowd as they tried to assess the situation. Kick Doe didn't move. His body lay still on the ground, his chest rising and falling shallowly, but his eyes were closed. The punch that Tank had landed was no ordinary blow. Unbeknownst to anyone, Kick Doe had an underlying health condition, a blood clot in his brain. He had ignored the headaches and the dizziness for years, and when Tank's fist connected with his temple, the clot ruptured. Tank, still panting, wiped blood from his face as a huge CERT team member barked at him to turn around and cuff up as everyone else watched as the guards crowded around Kick Doe. They called for medical staff, their radios crackling with urgency. The prison yard was deathly quiet now, the adrenaline that had fueled the fight draining away. Tank didn't feel victorious. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. He hadn't meant to hurt Kick Doe like this. He'd only wanted to defend his honor, to survive. As the guards lifted Kick Doe onto a stretcher, one of them shot Tank a cold look. They weren't blaming him, not yet, but the gravity of the situation hung in the air. Kick Doe had come into the fight thinking he could win, and for most of it, he had. But sometimes all it took was one punch, one moment of bad luck for everything to change. And now, as the medical team rushed Kick Doe toward the infirmary, Tank couldn't help but wonder if he had just sealed both their fates. The whispers in the yard began again, louder this time, as Tank was dragged off to the hole to do solitary confinement time. Chapter 10, The Big Surprise. Despite Kick Doe succumbing to his injuries, the prison investigation team decided not to charge Tank with another manslaughter charge, which would have kept him in prison another decade. After reviewing the prison yard cameras, they saw that the fight was consensual. After serving 18 months of his 7-year sentence, Tank was granted early release due to good behavior and the support of his legal team. He left Alto State Prison, changed man, ready to rebuild his life and career. Chapter 11, Returning to the Ring. Upon his release, Davis is offered a chance to return to the boxing world, but this time with a different purpose. He decided to use his fame and platform to raise awareness about prison reform and the challenges inmates faced. The story ends standing in front of a crowd, not as a fighter, but as a man with a new mission.
Don.